I'm often saddened by the amount of shame and guilt that singles experience sexually and feel sexually. And so I sometimes talk about experiencing a sexual reboot. And in a book I co-authored, I wrote called Soul Virgins, I define virginity and chastity as something that's three-dimensional. So often with singles, they'll feel like if I've already had sex with someone, I've forever forfeited virginity, or if they're a Christian, they may just feel a lot of guilt and shame, like could God ever help me become, the person that I would like to be sexually? And that's why it's important to me to talk about a soul virginity, because a soul virginity is three-dimensional. It is looking at, we are choosing now to be physically a virgin. But it isn't just hanging on whether we've had or not had sex. This type of soul virginity is really looking even more at the dimensions of our mind and our heart. And sometimes we may not have physically had sex, but we've watched so much porn and had so much of our mental imagery and distorted that we're certainly not virgin in our minds and oftentimes in our hearts we're not really sorting it through. I'm going to wait for my Adam. I'm going to wait for my Eve. So I think it's really important when we look at chastity and virginity to define it three-dimensionally and to realize that it can be reclaimed. I'm always excited when people realize that, there's a passage in the book of Joel in the Old Testament that talks about how God will restore the years that the locust ate. And he was talking about his children of Israel and how they had had so much misery and made such bad choices. But God came in and said, Israel, and he's saying to us as sexual beings too, if you'll allow me, I will come in and restore those broken places. I will take your guilt away. I will give you the ability now to live with chastity. And remember when we describe chaste, that's something very, very wise to be chaste. Chaste is that ability to be disciplined with our sexuality and our sexual feelings. Chaste is that ability to be pure. Chaste is that ability to wisely choose restraints around our sexuality. So no matter what we have done or haven't done, God really makes that call into our lives to say, please don't dwell with all this guilt and shame. Allow me to redeem this and restore this. Let me make you into a soul virgin. Let me make your heart attitudes in your mind into someone that really values sexuality to the way I put value on it. Sometimes I remember one couple in particular, and they called me up on the phone, and I was in Georgia at the time, in Atlanta, still am, and they were clear up in Ohio or somewhere up in the Midwest. But they called me and said, something's wrong with our sex life, and I just don't know what's wrong here. And I've had other couples call and saying, we aren't experiencing a very good sex life, and I know why. It's because we had sex before we were married. And so I get couples that are trying to sort out what effect their premarital sexual behaviors has on their marital sex. Is there consequence? Could there be baggage? Sure. But a lot of times what I see is the guilt. I don't see that God's cursing them. I see that they haven't been able to really restore that soul virginity and to really allow themselves to experience chastity. So I remember in particular the person on the phone I was talking to, I said, it isn't because of things you have done or haven't done. The reason your sex life isn't going the way you would like it to now is because of all the guilt that you're still experiencing. And God wants to somehow restore you into the lovers that He would like you to be. And then sometimes I feel like with this restoring chastity that we have kept a lot of God's sexual economy, His guidelines, but we haven't kept the guideline that I would like you not to have physical intercourse or not to have orgasms together prior to marriage. And so sometimes when I'm working through couples, I'll say, well, there was a lot of God's guidelines that you kept, and there was true intimacy. So I'm not trying to recreate a whole sex life here. What I'm trying to help you do is understand chastity. Or I'm trying to help you understand where you do feel legitimate guilt, or you do feel some baggage that we need to jettison, we need to get rid of. So isn't it really, and I'm a child of the 70s, isn't it cool that God can restore us. Isn't it cool that we can be a soul virgin and that we can live out our lives with fidelity, with chastity, no matter what's happened in our previous, behaviors, we can still be soul virgins.